was shot in the back. There is a key difference between the state charges being heard today and the federal charges, and the state arguing the shooting was an act of terrorism. Federal charges open the possibility of the death penalty. And Alice, you were in court for those federal charges.
That's right, Marian. I'm looking at that video. So interesting. They have him shackled, it looks like, for the hands. When he was brought into federal court last week for his initial appearance on that federal criminal complaint, his hands were not shackled. He entered the courtroom dressed similarly in a sweater, the white button down, because they are allowed to change out of their prison clothes into more formal clothes for their court appearance if they want to. So very similar there. He's wearing the sweater, looks like khaki pants, and the shirt there as well. Let's get right out to Lisa Rosner. She's live outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Lisa, what's going on there?
Well, Alice, as you mentioned, Mangione just pleaded not guilty, but outside the courthouse, behind all the media where I'm standing, there's about 24 people here standing in support of Mangione, chanting that there should be justice for Luigi. But right now, from what we know, Allie Bauman is inside the courtroom. She tells us this is wrapping up, but just now, Mangione's attorney made a couple of requests to the judge, including requesting immediate expedited discovery in this case, saying that the people have had this case for almost 3 weeks, and that was more than enough time to gather info, especially now that there are 2 proceedings happening. As we know, Mangione is charged 11 charges here in state court, but he also faces 4 federal counts, including stalking and murder, and that, if convicted on those counts, he would be eligible for the death penalty. Now, we know also from here inside state court, and just looking through Allie's very detailed notes, as I said, she is in court, we do know that Mangione, she said, was cooperative, and she made an issue about what we saw last week when Mangione was extradited from Pennsylvania to here in New York. You may remember he was taken here by helicopter, flanked by heavily armed guards. Mangione's attorney telling the judge that he was cooperative. There was no reason for the NYPD to have big assault rifles. And she said it was perfectly choreographed. She also complained about New York City's mayor. Now, earlier we spoke to someone who is a former FBI agent about the charges that he is facing in federal court.
So all it does is there are nails in the prosecution's case that help seal these matters to make sure they get a successful prosecution. But keep in mind, the investigation is still continuing. It's not over yet.
And here in state court, we know that Mangione's next court appearance will be February 21st. Back to you.
All right, Lisa, thank you. And here to break down what is going on in court today, attorney Rich Schoenstein.
He is a partner with Tarter, Krinsky and Drogan. Let's get right into it. And can you talk about the differences between the federal charges and the state charges here?
Absolutely. Well, the state charges are first-degree murder, including that terrorism aspect, which is what gets you from second-degree murder up to first-degree murder. 2 charges of first-degree murder, and then a bunch of charges for the weapon and some charges for a forged document. The federal charges have to do with federal activity, which is basically crossing state lines. So there's 2 charges of stalking, using interstate commerce or going across state lines. And then there's that murder charge on the federal level, which is pled as a top-tier federal murder count. And that, in the federal system, carries the possibility of the death penalty.
Now, I want to ask you, too, with this 11-count indictment here in state court, you were talking about murder in the first degree, and it says caused the death of Brian Thompson and that he was allegedly killed in furtherance of an act of terrorism. How difficult is it going to be for the Manhattan DA's office to prove this terrorism aspect? What sort of evidence, would they need to show?
Well, it is probably the most difficult aspect of the crime to prove, because ordinarily to prove murder, you don't have to prove anything about motive. You just have to prove that a person did it, perhaps did it intentionally. Here, you're going to have to prove that the murder was done for some sort of purpose that would convince a jury it's an act of terrorism, sending a message, striking fear in the heart of people who work in the healthcare industry, some sort of public-facing purpose to the murder that would constitute a terroristic act.
What do you know of the timeline of these cases? When will we see him back in court? When might we see the trials in this case?
So it's a good question. I mean, the first question is what's going to proceed first, the federal or the state charges? Now, typically, I expect the federal charges to move quicker. I expect a federal prosecution to move quicker, although the state case is a little more straightforward. And that's a matter that will be coordinated and maybe even negotiated by the prosecutors involved. The attorney, as you said during your report, is already pushing for discovery. His lawyers want the evidence right away. They want whatever's been gathered so they can start poking at it, so they can do their own investigation, so they can see how good the case is. I would expect him to be on trial perhaps in the second half of next year. Could take a little bit longer, but I expect this case will move pretty briskly.
Okay, Attorney Rich Schoenstein, thank you so much. Right now we were just getting a live look outside of the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. Lisa Rosner's outside. Allie Bauman was inside during this arraignment. We'll have much more coming up for you later. This has been a CBS 2 special report. I'm Alice Gaynor.
And I'm Mary Calvi. We will continue to follow the developments in this big story. Look for updates on CBS News New York starting today at 5. Now back to our regular programming.
This has been breaking news.